All right, so 1 Samuel 20. Yeah, 1 Samuel 20. 6:33. We got plenty of time. Hey, Kent. All right, so we're making good progress in 1 Samuel. Only about 12 more chapters to go. Somebody give me a summary of where we are in the book. What happened the last time we were together? Saul kept trying to kill David, Susan? What? That's what you said? Okay, yeah. Saul kept trying to kill David. How did it end up? Yeah. Mm-hmm. God intervened at the very end, and by his Spirit, he kept Saul's messengers from getting David. He also kept Saul himself from laying hold of David. So God's hand of protection over his anointed king, lots of different ways, through people, through Jonathan and his sister, through the providence of Saul not being able to hit somebody with a spear, through a display of power, the Spirit's power over him. God protected his king. At the end of chapter 19, Saul we talked about, he was humbled before the Lord. The Spirit stopped him from seizing David, caused him to prophesy and to lay naked for a day and a night. How humiliating and that must have been for the great king of Israel. But at some point, Saul recovered from whatever that was that God had placed upon him. And in the meantime, David was not going to stay around to find out what Saul was going to do next. And so as we begin chapter 20, David runs to Jonathan. And in chapter 20, we're going to read it a piece at a time. It gives us really a series of interactions between David and Jonathan. Most of the time, when we read this story of David and Jonathan, it's very familiar. You're probably going to be very familiar with it. It's the love and the friendship of David and Jonathan that are usually emphasized, and the takeaway is usually, you need to have friends, good friends like David and Jonathan, that love one another. And that's true, and that's even present in the text. You can see it from the text. But I agree with a scholar named Dale Ralph Davis, who said that this chapter 20, it's about covenant and the security that being in covenant gives. We're going to see that as we walk through it. Covenants are one of the themes that bind the story of Scripture together. They show the story, how God relates to mankind through these different covenants throughout the verses. Back in 1 Samuel 18, 1 through 5, Jonathan bound himself to David with a covenant. You remember that? It was right after he killed Goliath. Jonathan, it says he made a covenant with David. He loved him as his own soul, gave him his armor, gave him his sword, gave him all that stuff. And here in this chapter, what we're going to see is that covenant between David and Saul is reaffirmed and it is extended. And it is this covenant before the Lord that David, in this covenant that David and Jonathan are going to find, they're going to find security. They're going to find peace in dangerous and uncertain times, just as we have security and peace in God's covenant with us. Let's just read the text. Chapter 20, verse 1 through 4. And David fled from Naioth in Ramah and came and said before Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my guilt? And what is my sin before your father, that he seeks my life?" And he said to him, "Far be it. You shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing either great or small without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? It is not so." Verse 3 and 4, and David vowed again, saying, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes." And he thinks, "Do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do." So we back up and look at these things. At this point, Jonathan doesn't know, excuse me, that he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know that Saul is trying to kill David. You know, after Saul attempted to kill David a bunch of different ways, David certainly knows that Saul's trying to kill him. So he leaves Naioth, where Samuel was, and he goes to the only person who may offer him some help, Jonathan. And David's question to Jonathan is not whether or not Saul wants me dead. His question is why. Why does Saul want me dead? What have I done specifically is what he says. And Jonathan responds saying, you know, it isn't true that Saul intends to kill you. So remember, Jonathan hasn't appeared in the text since the beginning of chapter 19. And what was going on the last time we saw Jonathan? Yeah, that's right. He was the first to deliver David, if you want to say it that way, from Saul. He was David's advocate. He went to Saul and was talking, why? He's done nothing wrong to you. He's only done good to you. He was David's advocate. And what did Saul do when Jonathan said all these things about David? Yeah, he promised not to kill him. He made an oath before the Lord that he would not kill David. So that's the last thing we saw of Jonathan. So as far as Jonathan knows, the last word from Saul was his oath that he made in 19:6. As surely as the Lord lives, David will not die. So Jonathan isn't aware of all that's transpired since then. And so he uses the same language in responding to David as Saul's oath. And he tells David, you shall, far be it, you shall not die. The same words that Saul had said. He believed his father. He believed the oath that his father made. But David knows better, right? So David vowed, your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes. And he thinks, do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, there's but a step between me and death. David tells Jonathan, Saul's keeping this from you. That's why you don't know. Jonathan has not kept his love for David a secret. And we just talked about it in the last chapter, Jonathan was David's biggest advocate. So Jonathan hasn't been around to see the plots and the attempts on David's life. Jonathan wasn't in the room when Saul threw the spear at him 3 times. Jonathan wasn't around when he sent soldiers to David's home. So Jonathan doesn't know, but it doesn't matter that he is adamant and sure that Saul is not trying to kill David. In verse 4, Jonathan said to David, whatever you say, I will do. Why is Jonathan so willing to help David no matter what, even though at this point he doesn't believe yet that his father has gone back on his oath and is trying to kill David? He loves him? He's covenant with him, for sure. For sure. He doesn't believe David's life is in danger, but it doesn't matter. He's covenanted to David. David's God's anointed. Jonathan takes his covenant very, very seriously. Evidently, David has thought this through, so when Jonathan says, whatever you say, I'll do. David comes up with a plan. I don't think he came up with it on the fly. He's probably been thinking about it. And he has this plan so Jonathan and David would be sure, both of them, be proven to Jonathan, and David already knows that Saul's real intent is to kill him. Okay? 5 through 7. I'm just going to walk through these verses, so if you have any questions, just ask. David said to Jonathan, behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit at table with the king. It's David speaking. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field till the 3rd day and at evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asks leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the clan. If he says good, it will be well with your servant. But if he is angry, then know that harm is determined by him. So the royal household would be observing the new moon festival as it's prescribed in Numbers 10:10. And David, the servant of the king, is expected to be there. And when he's missed, he and Jonathan decide that Saul's intention is going to be discerned by how he reacts to David being missed. It seems simple enough, right? But you need to realize this is a big ask by David to Jonathan. He's asking Jonathan to lie to his father, something he had never done as far as we know, in the text anyway. He's asking Jonathan to put his life in danger. If Saul really is intent to kill him, he's probably going to try to kill Jonathan as well. And David knows this is a lot to ask. He's also asking Jonathan to put David before his family, before his father. And he knows it's a big deal. So David doesn't ask just as a friend. You know, you love me, I love you. Just do this for me because we're so close. David references the covenant relationship that Jonathan and he swore before the Lord. Verses 8 and 9, it says, "Therefore deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself. For why should you bring me to your father?" And Jonathan said, "Far be it from you. If I knew that it was determined by my father that harm should come to you, would I not tell you?" Deal kindly is not a good translation. It technically could be right, but it makes it kind of sound like David's asking him, just be nice to me, But the Hebrew word, I put it up there on the screen, is kesed. It is a word that is rooted in covenants, and it's hundreds and hundreds of times all through the Old Testament. And it's hard to translate fully in English. It's translated a lot of different ways all through our English Bibles, wherever it appears. So it's deal kindly, as it's translated here, show faithful love, show steadfast love, loving kindness, faithful mercy, loyal love. It's translated lots and lots and lots of different ways because it's so hard to nail down everything that this word is saying. It carries the idea of love and compassion and mercy, but it also is combined with loyalty and reliability and faithfulness. It's covenant love, I think, is the best way to put it. Many times God is expressed as showing covenant love, loyal love, faithfulness. David is appealing to the security and the assurance of the covenant promises that he has made and Jonathan has made with him. So in all of this confusion, is Saul trying to kill me? Is he not trying to kill me? I don't know what to do. What have I done wrong? In all of the confusion, all the trouble, all the fear, David goes to the person who has made covenant with him, a place where the promise of refuge was to be found. Where the covenant before the Lord was made, David expected to find loyal love, faithfulness, kesed. And so can we. Loyal love, faithfulness, mercy, however you want to translate it, flows not just from the promise, from the covenant, but from the nature of our covenant-keeping God who's made covenant with us. So let me give you an example. So Exodus 34:6 is when God put Moses in the cleft of the rock, and he passed by before him and announced his name. He said, "The Lord, Yahweh, Yahweh, the Lord, rich in mercy and faithfulness." He's saying rich in chesed, the loyal covenant love and faithfulness. And if you translate that Hebrew phrase, rich in mercy and faithfulness, you translate that Hebrew phrase into Greek, you have the same phrase that's said of Jesus in John 1:14. He's full of grace and truth. And so over and over again, we find that God is faithful. Jesus is faithful to his covenant, to his people. So to find refuge and assurance in the chaos and dangers of the world, to find loyal love and faithfulness of an all-powerful God, go to the one who has made covenant with you. Jesus does not leave or forsake his people. His covenant promises are certain even when nothing else is certain. And Jonathan recognizes this. Any questions, comments? Okay, verse 9. Verse 9, sorry. And Jonathan said, "Far be it from you," meaning there's no way you're going to die. No way I'm going to kill you. "If I knew that it was determined by my father that harm should come to you, would I not tell you?" So he says, of course, based on our covenant, of course, if my father planned harm to you, I would tell you. I'm loyal to you. If he meant you harm, you would know it. You would know it because I would tell you. But there's a problem. Verses 10 through 11. David said to Jonathan, "Well, who will tell me if your father answers you roughly? And Jonathan said to David, "Come, let us go into the field." So they both went out into the field. Now we aren't told why Jonathan leads him out into the field. More than likely, I think, well, before I tell you what I think, I'll just ask and y'all can discuss. Why do you think he takes him out in the field? Yeah, to hide, so nobody else will hear. I guess that's the consensus? Okay. We aren't told why. More than likely, it's probably the fear of somebody hearing their conversation. Because what Jonathan's about to say is way too dangerous for anybody else to hear. And this part of the chapter, chapter 20, it's really interesting. Because verses 12 through 17 don't need to be in the text at all. You can go immediately from the end of verse 11 to the beginning of verse 18, and the flow of the story is not interrupted at all. So David says, "Who's going to tell me, if your father answers you roughly?" Jonathan says, "Come on, let's go out into the field." And at the beginning of verse 18, Jonathan lays out the plan by which he will give David the news. So why is 12 through 17 here? Well, let's find out together. So it says, "And Jonathan said to David, 'The Lord, Yahweh, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow, the third day, behold, if he is well disposed toward David, shall I not then send and disclose it to you? But should it please my father to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan and more also, if I do not disclose it to you and send you away, that you may go in safety.'" See? Now notice what it says at the end of verse 13. "May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father." Literally, as he was with my father. The Lord had been with Saul. How had he been with Saul? When the Spirit came upon Saul, he was empowering him for what? To be king. So when Jonathan says, "May the Lord be with you as he was," past tense, "with my father," what's he saying? He says he knows that he's going to be king. For Jonathan to ask that the Lord would be with David as he had been with Saul is affirming that David was to be the future king. And we know that for sure because of what Jonathan says next. Look at 14 through 17. He says, "If I am still alive," meaning when you become king, "show me the steadfast love," that's our same word, chesed, "of the Lord, that I might not die. And do not cut off your steadfast love," same word, "from my house forever," when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies." And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. All right, so let's take this apart piece by piece. He says, "I know there's a day coming when the Lord will cut off all of your enemies from the face of the earth." He says, what kind of kingdom would David have if the Lord cut off all his enemies from the face of the earth? Yeah, absolutely. He'd have an eternal kingdom. He'd have a worldwide kingdom. He says, "I know that you'll be king. I know that God will elevate you above all of your enemies, for you are the anointed king." Jonathan is not only declaring himself to be for David, but he's declaring himself to be against the enemies of David. I don't know if he knew it or not at this point, but Jonathan's covenant with God's anointed was about to set him against his own father, his own family, his own future. And I think he realizes it at some level, because he says, when that happens, if I'm still alive, show me covenant love. He's asking for David to show him what David has just asked him to show David. When he said deal kindness, it's the same word, steadfast love. The same chesed that David just asked Jonathan for, now Jonathan's saying, honor your covenant with me as God's anointed so that I may not die. When a new dynasty or a family came to power, the first thing that happened was they killed all the relatives of all the previous kings. You can see it in 1 Kings 15, 1 Kings 16, 2 Kings 10. The new king always thought that he needed to dispose of all of the rivals who actually had some sort of claim to the throne. So there would be no rivals to his dynasty, to his kingship. Jonathan is asking David to remember the covenant when you become king and show faithfulness to him, covenant faithfulness, if he is alive when David becomes king. And he asks for that same covenant faithfulness to be extended to his descendants. He says, don't cut off your hesed, your steadfast love from my house forever. And this really is an act of humble faith and submission by Jonathan, isn't it? He trusts God. He trusts God's anointed, David the king, though doing so means humbling himself, letting go of his own claim to the throne. It says that in this way, Jonathan made covenant with the house of David. At this point, there is no house of David. I mean, he's got a wife, but David has no sons to speak of. Yet Jonathan knew that God would establish the house of David forever. And incidentally, if you care, 2 Samuel 21:7, David kept this covenant to Jonathan. In 2 Samuel 21:7, it says, "But the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Saul's son Jonathan, because of the oath of the Lord that was between them, between David and Jonathan, the son of Saul." David the king, if you know the story, David the king brought Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth, who was crippled, to eat at his royal table. If that's not a picture of the gospel, I don't know what is. So all of that, verses 12 through 17, it didn't need to be there for the flow of the story. You could take 12 through 17 out and the text would flow perfectly together. But it is there because this passage isn't just about love among friends and doing favors among friends and being with those who love you and you love. It's about the assurance and the security of a covenant with God's anointed. You see it? All this covenant language everywhere. Jonathan is making covenant with David. David's making covenant with Jonathan, and they're appealing to the essence of the covenant when they say show loyal love, show your steadfast love. They're saying honor the covenant. Jonathan trusts God's will and God's anointed over his own family, over his own life, and the wealth and the glory of the kingdom that he is in line to receive by saying, you are the one who is the true king. So now, any questions? So now Jonathan continues to explain how David will be informed of what he finds out. Remember the question David asked, who's going to tell me what you find out? Verses 18 through 23 tell that. Then Jonathan said to him, he's answering David's earlier question, tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed because your seat will be empty. On the third day, go down quickly to the place where you hid yourself when the matter was at hand, and remain beside the stone heap, and I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I shot at the mark. And behold, I will send the boy, saying, go find the arrows. If I say to the boy, look, the arrows are on this side of you, take them, and you are to come. Then you are to come, for as the Lord lives, it's safe for you, and there is no danger. But if I say to the youth, look, the arrows are beyond you, then go, for the Lord has sent you away. And as for the matter of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever. Still referencing the covenant. Those verses really are pretty self-explanatory. In case they're being watched, they don't know what's going to happen. He's going to go to Saul. He's going to do what David's asked. And in case they're being watched and not able to meet, not able to get together and talk, David is going to know by this sign what Jonathan discovers. Okay? So let's look how it plays out. So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food. The king sat on his seat, as at other times. On the seat by the wall, Jonathan sat opposite, and Abner sat by Saul's side. But David's place was empty. Yet Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought something has happened to him. He's not clean. Surely he is not clean. So clearly Saul expected David to be there. And since this was New Moon Festival, beginning of the month festival, to attend required being clean before the Lord. So Saul's first assumption at David's absence must be that, David is unclean somehow. He's unable to attend. Maybe he touched a dead body or something as all the wars and things were going on. Who knows? But notice that even Saul knew David was a man who fulfilled his duty and his responsibility. He just assumes the only thing that would keep him from it was his devotion to God. If he was unclean, he wouldn't be able to come to the feast, so maybe that's probably what just happened. But Saul's thinking is also strange to me, because it doesn't seem to occur to Saul, he might be absent because I tried to kill him 14 times. It does not seem like that even registers. He just assumes David's supposed to be here, and David's going to be here. But that changes on the second day. You can see, I bring that up you can just see how blind Saul is at this point. It changes on the second day when Jonathan fulfills his oath to David. So on the second day, Saul does notice. On the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was empty, and Saul said to Jonathan his son, "Why has not the son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today?" Jonathan answered Saul, "David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, 'Let me go, for our clan holds a sacrifice in the city. My brothers commanded me to be there. So now, if I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away and see my brothers. For this reason, he has not come to the king's table.'" So here's the test, right? Here's the test that they were hoping for. How is Saul going to answer? Saul is going to blow up. He's going to explode. And in his remarks, what he says to Jonathan is so revealing, but it also shows the cost of being in covenant with God's anointed. So verse 30, questions? Okay. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die." Why is Saul so mad? What reason does he give in this passage? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Say again?
He might be mad because it was his son that told him he didn't talk to Saul. David didn't talk to Saul.
Mad because it was Jonathan that told him to leave and didn't talk to Saul? What were you going to say, Kathy?
I was going to say because he wants Jonathan to have the kingdom after him.
He wants Jonathan to have, I'm absolutely sure he does want Jonathan to have the kingdom after him. What does he say to Jonathan about why he's done this? Yeah, he chose David over Saul. You see it? All those things are true. Everything that you said, those are true too. But that's a response. He wants Jonathan to have the kingdom. He wanted the say-so as the king to say where David goes. But ultimately, he's mad at Jonathan because he chose David over Saul. He chose David over his family. You see it there? That you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame.
He didn't like his mom much either.
Jim said he didn't like his mom much either.
Perverse, rebellious.
Yeah. Saul hurled several insults at Jonathan. And, Jonathan doesn't show any sign of wavering at all. But you got to think it had to have been hard to hear. First there's shame. He shames him. He shames him for his betrayal, choosing David, calling him the son of a rebellious woman. Perverse, rebellious woman. That's like saying, "I'm not even sure you're my son." It's an indictment upon the mother, of course, but it's also a slander of his son. My son would never act like this. You are the son of a perverse, rebellious woman. Then he throws guilt at Jonathan, claiming that his faithfulness to David, his choice of David, was bringing shame upon his family and his origin. He says, the shame of your mother's nakedness. Your NIV says, the shame of the mother who bore you. It's like saying you're guilty of betraying your family. You're proving that you're not my son. And then Saul chastises Jonathan for undercutting his own future. As long as David lives, neither you nor your kingdom is going to be established. You're jeopardizing your own future. You're jeopardizing your own wealth by your attachment to David. You're jeopardizing your rule. You're jeopardizing the kingship. There's no indication in any text in this chapter that any of that sways Jonathan at all. But how many other people might be swayed to protect their own fortune, their own destiny, their own life, instead of giving it all away to be united to God's anointed? Think that's a big temptation? Yeah. But for Jonathan, true life is not found in securing yourself or your kingdom. It's found in covenant relationship with God, covenant relationship with God's anointed. Jonathan knew the kingdom was God's kingdom, not his. And God had already given it to David. He made the declaration earlier in the field. And his covenant with David was central to his faith in the Lord. This is God's people. This is God's kingdom. He can choose the king that he desires. So we can hear Jesus' words ringing through here in this section when he said in Luke 14, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Jonathan is it's not that Jonathan hates Saul, it's that he's laying it all aside and prioritizing his covenant relationship with God's anointed. Look how Jonathan reacts. Then Jonathan answered Saul his father, why should he be put to death? What's he done? But Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. And Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David because his father had disgraced him. Notice what the text says. Saul, his father, 3 times in 3 verses. That's the idea. He's still, by this time, we know that Saul is Jonathan's father, but it keeps repeating it over and over. Jonathan is choosing the covenant with God's anointed over his own father. Jonathan uses the very same words that David used at the beginning of the chapter. David said, what have I done? Jonathan says, what has he done? And in this act of rebellion in Saul's eyes, it's clear to Saul that Jonathan has identified himself with David, so Saul is going to treat him like David, and he hurls the same spear at him that he threw at David 3 different times. And now Jonathan knows David was right, and Saul has determined to put him to death. And when this happens, Jonathan is angry, you can imagine, and he leaves. It also says that he grieved. But notice why he's grieving. It's not because of his relationship with Saul. It's not because of how Saul treated him. It's because of how Saul treated David. You see it? He was grieved for David because his father had disgraced him. Jonathan's priority from front to back, from beginning to end, is David. So now he's going to fulfill his oath, and he's going to warn David with the signs that were promised. Now, we're going to walk through this pretty quick because it's pretty self-explanatory. It says, in the morning, Jonathan went out into the field to the appointment with David, and with him a little boy. And he said to his boy, run and find the arrows that I shoot. As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the boy came to the place of the arrow that Jonathan shot, Jonathan called after the boy and said, is not the arrow beyond you? And Jonathan called after the boy, hurry, be quick, do not stay. Jonathan's boy gathered up the arrows and came to his master, but the boy knew nothing. Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. So he fulfilled the sign, letting David know the Lord is sending you away. That's the language he used earlier. Now that's pretty self-explanatory. They just completed the sign that he had promised to give. And then these last 3 verses, you have this tearful farewell. It says, and Jonathan gave his weapons to his boy and said to him, go carry them to the city. And as soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times. And they kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. The sign had been given, but there's also, there's nobody around so that they're able to speak. David honors Jonathan, bowing. They kissed, they wept. Why does David weep the most, do you think? I don't know either. I'm just asking. He thinks he might not see Jonathan again. In fact, this will be the last time they will see each other in a friendly. They will see each other one other time, but it's going to be in the height of, chaos and battle and things.
I think it's because of his loyalty.
Because of his loyalty?
Loyalty of Jonathan to David.
Loyalty to David?
Yeah. Sacrifice. How much he went through, he liked him.
Yeah. Oh, you're saying you think David wept the most because of seeing Jonathan's loyalty and his sacrifice to find out and estrangement from his father. Yeah. Oh, I can see that. Huh?
He may fear for Jonathan's future as well, because now he knows that Jonathan followed through with the lion and
Yeah.
had the anger of Saul.
Yeah. He may fear for Jonathan's safety now that Saul knows Jonathan has chosen David over him. For sure.
Really love Saul and really love God's appointed. And there's this grief when you see God's leaders make bad choices today and in David's time. That God, he knew Saul would fail, that Saul would make bad choices. And yet, in your heart, you really hope that somehow he can make the right choice in the person he doesn't.
Yeah. Just hoping, you think he was upset, weeping and grieved because Saul had made the wrong choice and Saul was headed down that path. Anybody else?
The only man thought, that now Jonathan's found out what his dad really was, and who he puts first. And, maybe I felt very sorry for Jonathan.
Yeah. Felt sorry for him that he found out that Saul truly is, at the beginning, Jonathan was like, no, he's not going to kill you. He's not. And he found out that, he is evil.
He had said that his dad wouldn't do anything without telling him they were that close.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? It doesn't tell us why, but you can see all of these reasons. It's just a very, very tear-filled, heartfelt goodbye. And the last verse in the chapter, Jonathan bids David to go in peace because of the covenant that they have made together. And it's very, very poignant ending to this chapter. It says, then Jonathan said to David, go in peace because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever. And David rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. Though David and Jonathan they'd be separated now. They would meet face to face one more time before the death of Jonathan. But they would be separated now. They were still joined by the covenant oath that they swore in the Lord's name before the Lord, their covenant together. Their covenant would also continue through their descendants forever. And because of this covenant, Jonathan says, David, you can go in peace. How can he go in peace when Saul's going to be hunting him for the rest of Saul's life?
He's protected by the Lord.
He's protected by the Lord? Yeah. Biblical peace is not just a general tranquility where everything is fine. It's an assurance and a rightness even in the center of turmoil and chaos. David can go in peace, even as Saul hunts him for the rest of Saul's life, because of this covenant bond that has been established and established peace between he and Jonathan. They both know at this point, between the interaction, the conversations that they've had, they both know David's going to be king. They both know God is going to wipe out all David's enemies. They both know Saul is doomed to destruction. They both know Jonathan is not going to take the throne. And so with this covenant, they are affirming one another that Jonathan is ceding basically his whole life because he trusts God's anointed. He trusts David, and he is putting all of his assurance, his future, his life, his everything in this covenant that he has made with God's anointed. And he's going to go back to Saul. He's going to go, he's going to go back to the kingdom and back to the army and back to all the things. But it's clear that he has, I don't want to say bet his future, but he is assured that the future is with David, and he makes this covenant with him. Those in covenant with God's anointed, they don't have peace because things are peaceful, but because a greater one than David or Jonathan has made covenant with us. Jesus said in John 16:33, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I've overcome the world. You see it? Peace. Peace at the same time. Peace at the same time you have tribulation. But just like this peace for Jonathan and David, our covenant of peace with Jesus cost a high price. It cost God's anointed his earthly life. It cost him being estranged from the Father as sin was poured out upon his head. Jonathan had chosen the peace of a covenant relationship with God's anointed over his father, over his name, over his own kingdom, because Jonathan trusted in God and he trusted in the king that God had chosen. And when anyone trusts in Jesus, the greater David, the same is true. We choose Christ over our own kingdoms, our own names, even our own lives. And we enter into covenant by faith. And the point, in my opinion, of this chapter is that in the covenant is where you find your peace. It's where you find your security. It's where you find the assurance to be able to endure, whether it's years of being chased by the king or whether it's living under the king's rule, knowing that he's a madman, as Jonathan's going to do, or whether it's living in the tribulations of the world and the sufferings of the world that we go through on a daily basis. David, in his uncertainty, and Jonathan's uncertainty, they found certainty and security in the covenant that they'd made. And we can too in the covenant that we have with Jesus Christ, the greater David.
Yes.
Questions, comments? Okay, let's pray. Father, we do love you. We thank you for your word. God, we thank you for the covenant of peace. We thank you that you are with us and that you have given all so that we as sinners might come into covenant with you. God, help us to find our peace, our certainty, our security, our all in who you are, in the faithfulness and the loyal love of your covenant, in the promises that you have made to never leave or forsake us no matter what, in the promises that you have made to see us through all of the tribulation of this life and to work all things for our good. God, it's hard to see when we're in the midst of it. But God, we thank you that your word is true. We thank you that your word is, it's non-negotiable, God, and it applies to each one of us. And so, God, help us to hold fast to those promises, to that covenant, knowing that you are God who cannot lie and that you are God who is faithful to your promises. Help us to find peace in that when there's no peace to be found. We thank you. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.